all this ranching deal we're talking about here was in the back of my mind. It had about 2/3 of my mind taken up. So I finally got enough seed money to start, and I built a pretty good credit. And with the help of some of my friends, I began to invest in a little piece of land. First piece of land I bought was 10 acres, Burnett County. I bought it from an old family colored fellow who was son of a slave who had given us 10 acres, and the white people had cut his road out. He couldn't get to it. So he come to me and said, would you buy this acre? And I said, I haven't got any money, but he said, I'll trust you. He said, give me $50 and pay me $250 more later. And so I bought that land, and I've been trading land ever since then. I've done more trading land and made more money trading land than I ever did in the cattle business. So I continued on. And
now with those 10, you bought those 10 acres of land, but you continued on in the construction.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
And the land was an investment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But all this land that I do, I was doubling my money on it or tripling my money on it when I'd sell it, and I kept going along. And I had bought a little piece of land of 72 or 100 acres, Marble Falls, where I used to hunt and fish when I was a little kid. It always appealed to me. I'd spent about $10,000 on it. It happened to go out to the river where there's a lot of sand and gravel deposits, and I kind of evaluated that a little bit when I bought it. And I turned around and sold that to the concrete people there in town for $50,000. And I took that $50,000, went down to San Antonio, and so I found a 2,000-acre ranch out there that's for sale. And I took $38,000 of that 50 and put it into this ranch here and picked up the note on the rest of it. I bought that on credit. I had already financed with the land bank, paid $50 an acre for it. So a good friend of mine, who's Mr. Jesse McNeil, he's a banker and equipment dealer in San Antonio, says, if you keep that land up 20 years, it'll bring you $1,000 an acre. I took that with a grain of salt, but we kept it for 21 years, and we added land around that. We got it up to about 5,800 acres. One day a guy walked into that ranch. He says, would you sell this place? We'd cleaned it up and improved it and carried 4 times as many cattle as it would when we went there. Drilled the irrigation well. And I said, I guess we would. I said, I was kind of wanting to exchange it. I was itching to do some trading, and so he says, what do you take for it? And I said, I guess I'd sell it for $1,100 an acre. And he said, I believe I'll just buy that. And he said, I haven't got all that money right now. Well, I said, you got $250,000, haven't you? He said, no, I haven't even got that. I said, well, go down to the bank and get a letter of credit for $250,000, and I'll make a contract here with you. And I said, when you have the rest of it? He said, I have it January the 1st. So he paid me $6 million for that land, which I had $600,000 in it and improvements. I didn't object that kind of trade, but I had to figure out a way to exchange it in something. So the fact that he wanted to close it on the 1st of the year, that about mid-year, really fit into my program because I wanted to make a 1031 tax-free exchange into another piece of property. So meantime, we'd bought some little ranches out in New Mexico. We had about 80,000 acres of deeded land out there and some state lease land on ranches. And things began to get tight in the oil business, and Mr. Robert O. Anderson, who had ranches all over the Southwest, kind of had a little problem with his. He had 16% interest on a shotgun loan on the Ladder Ranch in New Mexico. A guy come to me and wanted to say, would you buy the Ladder Ranch? And, the way ranching it is so tough to finance them and make them pay that I knew there wasn't any way that we could buy the Ladder Ranch. But I had these 4 other ranches out there, and I didn't even have them paid for, but I had them cash flowing. There's a raising up on the cattle. I paid enough down on them where the cattle was cash flowing. So I got thinking one night. I said, he still owed me the rest. That's, to put up $250,000 on that $6 million deal. I said, that's kind of silly to wait till the first year. I said, I might buy that Ladder Ranch anyway. I think I'll trade Robert O. Anderson this contract in the $2.25 million in on the Ladder, which he wanted $15 million for. And I told him what I'd do, and then I called me out there to look at it, and I looked at it, and I said, well, it's not as good as I thought it was. How about throwing in these cattle and these horses and these trucks and tractors? He said, well, we can't do that. And I said, well, I'm not interested then. I said, tell you what I'll do. I'll trade you 5 ranches. I'll trade you this paper and 4 ranches in New Mexico for that ranch there. If you throw in 2,200 head of cattle and 100 head of saddle horses and all the bulls you got. They took me up on that. That's how I come in the Ladder Ranch.
What year are we talking about here?
1985. Gene and his wife lived on the Ladder and operated it. It was like old-time war when we moved in there. You know, I'd bought this stuff, believing everything everybody told me. I bought all the cows, all the calves, all the horses, all the machinery and everything else, but stuff started disappearing, you know, after we signed the paper. I drove up one day, and there's 2 big truckloads of calves on the south end of the ranch. It's 28 miles long. They had these calves loaded. I said, "What the hell y'all think you're doing here?" And, "Oh, we're fixing to sell these calves." I said, "No, we're not. We're fixing to unload them." I said, "You got that backwards." Then Mr. and Ms. Ted Turner come along after we operated it for about 8 years, and they had to have a ranch. And Gene called me and said, what do you reckon we ought to do about this there year? And Miss Jane told her husband, said, call them and call off that other deal. We like this ranch better, and we're going to buy this ranch. So he called me, and I said, well, be sure they like it. And if they really like it, well, we'll try to do a deal with them.
Tell us a little bit about your operation there, how you went from New Mexico to Texas, because I understand there's a story there too.
Well, yeah, I started negotiating for this other land here, which was for sale. I wanted to exchange what I got out of the Lyda Ranch into it, where I'd have another 1031 exchange. And 1031 doesn't beat anybody out of any taxes, but it prolongs. When you're trading like property for like property, you still have this tax obligation, but you push it down the road a little ways, you know. So I did a 1031 exchange. I paid some lawyers lots of money to do that exchange, and then I got questioned by the IRS about the exchange. I certainly wasn't capable of telling them how to do it, but I spent over $100,000 getting it done right through professionals. And of course, the IRS, they'll question anything they can to justify the job, I guess, you know. So we had a big argument. They sent me a bill for $3.5 million, you know. I didn't get any money in the trade, so according to my attorneys, I didn't owe them anything. But after arguing with them another year or two, they almost put me in jail over it. But they finally got to negotiating, and we settled it out and paid them some portion of that amount, but not near what they was asking for. Our ranch, the present ranch, is located in Pecos, South Pecos, and North Brewster, and we have a supplementary ranch in Reeves and Pecos, North Pecos County. I bought this ranch from the Elsinore Land and Cattle Company. I traded for it on a 3-way exchange. The time between these two ranches made it work real good, because you got certain time limit to do these things. You know, exchange it within the time limit. And Gene had together about 5,000-6,000 head of cattle off the Lyda Ranch. That's how come this ranch to be named Escalera. Jane Fonda wanted the brand and the name Lyda in New Mexico, and we moved and established the same brand in Texas, but we named it La Escalera so we wouldn't get in a lawsuit over that. And we got 282,000 acres of deeded land.
So when you traded the land, but you kept the cattle.
Yeah.
How many cattle were these that we were?
3,000 mother cows and about 3,000 calves and bulls. We had about a couple hundred bulls. Started out from childhood with a desire to own a ranch, and it's just been a progressive step since I was 8 or 9 years old to try to get a ranch and make it a profitable operating ranch, and we think we've done fairly well at it. The good Lord, he's the best friend I've ever had, and he's the only man that never has backed out on contract with me, you know. God Almighty. You know, I wasn't supposed to do these things. He's let me do, you know, but I did them. But I think he's expecting me to put forth a little effort, you know, and I tried to do that. And that's the only thing I got to say about it.